Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the show, The Journey with Jen Snow, Hypno Talk. And it's Friday morning. It's morning coffee. For those of you in the U.S., happy Thanksgiving and happy Friday, everybody. Thank you for your time, your energy, and spending some moments with me this morning to talk about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what it feels like to go into a past life. And for those of you who have experienced this, it can be different every time. It can be the same every time. It is a source of evolution, and that evolution of every time we do hypnosis, self-hypnosis, and we move forward, we actually get into this space where it gets easier and easier and easier, and our inner senses begin to open up just a little bit more so that we get comfortable. And the funny thing about jumping into a past life is when we get comfortable with those past lives and how that process works, it gets so much easier and more simple. Hello, Alex. Hello, Tana. Thank you for joining us on YouTube. For those of you on TikTok here, if you have questions about this process and what I'm talking about, or want to share your experience, join us on YouTube, The Journey with Jen Snow, because like I said in the beginning, I kind of can't read sideways, and I've got the camera sideways, so I won't be able to read your comments, but I do appreciate you guys being here. And so there we go. And I'm super excited to talk about this. I know that we talk about this, and I thought, well, let's recap this week, because this week has been an interesting week when it comes to clients and their sessions and kind of going through their process. I've had some clients who are first-time clients, and for those of you who don't know how I work, I often offer a 90-minute and 3-hour session. Every first session is 3 hours because there's a lot of information that we go through before we actually begin the journey to really help you achieve your success and reach your goals a little bit faster and more effortlessly and easily. And prepping your session is a big thing. I know that sounds weird, and you're like, wow, how do you prep a hypno session where you're going to go into a past life? Well, first thing is that we get you in a place where you understand how you're going to receive that information, where your dominant sense lies for you, and what that's going to look like, and how information is going to reveal itself to you. And then figuring out, once we have that information, the big unknown, the uncertainty kind of comes out of the game. Like, yes, we don't know where you're going to go exactly. Yes, there is a million options where you could go based on the emotional connection to what the wisdom, understanding, the unwinding, the releasing, the clearing that you seek. For instance, one of my clients, now she has a soul contract with 2 other family members in her family. And that soul contract has created habits, cycles, and patterns between the 3 of them, not necessarily all of them together, like, the relationship between the 3 of them and then their individual relationships with each other had really affected their overall connection in this current 21st incarnation. So we decided to go back to the origins, to the beginning of the soul contract between these 3 individual people in this family. And we ended up back in a life where they were all actually a part of that life. So it wasn't a generational life where, you get there, but you're not really there. And so when this client stepped into that life, now normally this client is very, very visual. And in our, setting her up, she sees everything. But when we got into the past life, she was feeling it. So the information was coming through her feeling, her sensation, and her knowingness. And that's how she ended up actually describing the entire life. Now, when we got there, she did discover who each person was in this life and the cycle between them, the habits between them, patterns between them and the soul contracts between them. And in these soul contracts, they were actually meant to, in this incarnation, which she discovered through the soul screening process, to unwind the continual cycle that had gone on through several lives and several incarnations. What the information she got from that life, when we got on the backside of that life, was that this wasn't just in this life, but there were several other lives that had these three souls had come into incarnation with each other and had tried to work through this pattern, this cycle between them, so that they could come to completion, so that they no longer moving forward would be tied in this web of connection and karma and soul contracts. So as we got through this soul screening process, we screened out all of the information we got from the life, all of the information that we actually gathered from this client and I just talking, and went through all of that. And when we got to the end of it, we asked her soul, her super consciousness, to come forward and for confirmation that if the cycle was complete, or did we need to go into another life to check that out, to make sure there was anything, no loose ends, that there was no entanglement left. And we got that confirmation, and it felt complete to the client. So we brought her back in, and the connections between that life were very interesting. For her, feeling everything instead of seeing everything made that journey so much different for her, because the intensity of the emotion and feeling the scenes and the relationships and the conversations in that life were very different for her, because in this life, her emotional connection to these other two family members has been really shut down. And that was the cycle, the pattern, is being able to emotionally accept everybody for who they are, where they are at in life, and be okay with that. And that was the purpose of that life, was to experience that. But unfortunately, because we have beautiful free will in this space of Earth, that doesn't always translate, because we get emotionally connected and we have emotional reactions, and that leads us in directions and we follow it around. And it's super interesting how we do that, and how that dictates sometimes when we get off course, or we get into soul contracts that we have to come back and we choose. And when we're on the other side, her soul was very clear that all three of them chose to do this. Like, it was very interesting the way that their blueprint interconnected with each other, and how that blueprint was designed to help them and their own personal evolution, but their soul family, their spirit connection, also that evolution, so that they could each individually move forward. Now, when we got to that point, the higher selves of both the other two family members, they still had some stuff to work out. However, on my client's side, her connection, her soul contract with both them, of those two other souls, was complete for her, so she can move forward. And it was profound, the results. So I got a message from her 3 days later, and she had gone to meet one of her family members and spent the day with her family member, and actually had the best day of her entire life with this family member. And the difference between the energetic connection between both and the emotional connection between herself and this other family member, she said, was completely different and fully shifted. That, she was just in tears. It brought her to tears in that moment. So sometimes when we go in and we cord and we connect and we follow the family tree and unwind at the origin, that shift can, and potentially, when all the higher self and the soul energy is in agreement and alignment with it, begin to shift the tangible relationship that you have with somebody in this current incarnation. That can be some of the results. This isn't the first time I've seen these types of sessions go in and unwind the soul contracts and the patterns and cycles between people, and have it complete and end that cycle, where then the next time these two souls meet each other in this incarnation, that the vibe between them, the frequency between them, vibration between them, the emotions between them has shifted. And it can be a very powerful and positive thing. Now, that may not change the relationship or the status of the relationship. It may change what you do with that shift is completely up to you. And that is the beauty of free will. And maybe it mends some inner some inner wounds that you have and some burdens that you've carried. And perhaps as you release those burdens, you move forward, walking your separate pathways, or perhaps it brings you together. That is completely up to you. And that is the joy of that process. And walking through a past life, feeling and knowing that the scenes that are unfolding before you, it is a different perspective on moving through, but it doesn't mean it's better or worse. It just means sometimes we have to feel our way through things to be able to interpret the events that took place once upon a time. And to be able to give yourself the opportunity to really step back and go, okay, I'm feeling it, and not judging it, not trying to decipher it, and trusting enough that the narrative that's unfolding is going to get you to a space where you can connect to what it is you were supposed to know, whether it's the purpose, the lesson, the forgiveness, the saying goodbye, or just really unwinding all of the negative attachments and anchors and burdens that have come forward from that life. But feeling and being able to work through your inner mind and your inner emotional being on that connection, because sometimes it's connected that way. And that can be why you go through this life or a regression moment, and that's how it works for you. And sometimes other ways work. Like we go in, we see. So I had a first-time client yesterday, and when we went in, this client was a seer all the way. Actually, I'm tapping into the emotional side of the events was actually more difficult for her. So when we went in, sticking and allowing what she saw and the impressions that she was getting from the scene that was unfolding before her, she was watching it like a movie. She wasn't actually seeing it. She wasn't fully regressed. She wasn't seeing it through her eyes, but she was stepping back and kind of hovering above the scene and watching it. And the moment, when she stepped into the scene, just to kind of when we go into a past life, we usually drop into a moment in that past life that is significant. And getting into that moment and just kind of grounding into that moment gives us the ability to move forwards and backwards. And so because she was watching it as like a movie and was able to give me that information when she was discussing that first scene that she dropped into, we were able to fast forward and rewind every moment. So we kind of like having a clicker, and I asked her to rewind back to the childhood in that time, in that incarnation. And that's where we started walking forward from, and it just kept fast forwarding. And as we fast forward, the details came to her. But it was, for her, it was all about watching a movie and just, the impressions, the emotions that were in those moments. But the purpose for her in this life, the big purpose, was the point of going back to this life. And sometimes when we get to the end of the life and we clear things out, we go through our screening, we go through, our goodbyes. Is there anyone you want to forgive? Anyone you say goodbye to? Is there any insight and wisdom that's going to help you move forward? And at the end of the screening, we always check in to see what's left. Is there anything left from this life that is still connected to you? And in that moment, you have that wisdom, that knowledge. And sometimes there's stuff that you haven't shared or you didn't review because it wasn't the reason that you went there. But when we get into the screening side, you do get that insight because you've lived that life. You have access to all the information of that life. And then you can go through and, all right, you know what, there was this moment, so I want to unwind this. So sometimes there's that reflection that happens just before we step into that universal soul energy that is yours and yours alone, to like close off and mend and recalibrate your vibration so that life goes to the Akashic records as a book that is now complete, versus a book that is open and technically, possibly interrupting your current incarnation in this 21st century. So we go through that and we get there and we move through that, which is always fun because it's very interesting to see how that information comes to you. And when you're remote viewing, it doesn't come any less effective or clearly. It's just sometimes you watch a scene and you end up describing the scene. but knowing that somehow you're watching yourself move through, and the process is no less effective than being in a full regression or feeling it and just knowing it. It's just depending what you need in those moments and how it's gonna best help you. So your senses are really in tune with your subconscious mind, and your subconscious mind is really great at making sure that you've got that connection that is going to serve you and help you in the very best way that we can. And so going through that and kind of reliving that life, but watching it from afar and fast forwarding it, we were able to gather a lot of information. And as we stepped through, it was seeing the connection between that incarnation, this incarnation, and the webs between them and how they integrated and got activated, triggered the activating triggers that brought that information back into the conscious, unconscious space, and was able and started to be a part of this incarnation. Was really quite fascinating, and how that spider web, those linkages actually made their connections through the emotional presence and essence of a particular event that happened a little while ago. And then it all came flooding back in to her cell memory. And sometimes, when we go on these journeys, we can't always explain why we feel the way we feel. And sometimes when we go on these journeys and we walk through an alternate past incarnation, we begin to see how interesting it is and how our mind associates the essence and presence of an imprint and impression of a moment that gets locked into our being, and how our being begins to respond to that. And then the other session recap of the week, one of the other fascinating sessions I had had a client who had never done any kind of past life hypnosis, soul regression work, and we ended up in a very interesting life where she had walked through some definite traumatic events. But in this regression, this client actually jumped in and out. So she would go from seeing the scene before her to in the scene and seeing through her eyes, seeing above. And then there were moments where she was in a space of just knowing and feeling. So she kind of went through all of her inner senses. Her sense of taste and smell would come in, and then it would, when it wasn't important or wasn't the lead open sense that could help her decipher what she needed to know from that moment, why it was significant, why that moment meant something to her, what she carried forward from that moment, what she was feeling in that moment, what she experienced in that moment, what belief systems were built, what habits, what connections she made, both physically, mentally, emotionally, and energetically in those moments. So she kind of went through the gamut of in and out in different aspects. So which made the scene of that journey very interesting, because at every hop forward, it would change for this client. So every progression forward in this past life and this past life experience, this past life regression, her senses on how to decipher that moment, how to interpret that moment, how that moment was revealed for her would change. And so it was on my end, it was very fascinating and interesting to watch how every time another sense would be how she went through that moment in time and how she was able to express that moment in time. And I just thought it was the coolest thing, because sometimes that's how it is, in the sense of that we don't always know how, as we step into a scene, how that scene is going to approach us and how we're going to approach that scene, and giving yourself the opportunity and the openness to trust and be okay with the idea that if you move forward and you're in a past life or you're in a regression moment, and as you fast forward or as you jump into the next important, significant scene in that life, that you allow yourself the freedom to have that information come to you. That you allow yourself the freedom to know and trust that if it's through your knowingness, if it's through your feeling, if it's through seeing or your sense of taste, smell, or any other sense of awareness that comes forward for you, any other ability that may be what you need in that moment, so that you can begin to express that moment, because there's something significant there for you to release, learn from, complete, unwind, let go of, clear, or in some people's case, take with you. I've had past lives, where we go to a positive life, where we go after something positive so that you can remember what it feels like. I do this all the time in my group Tuesday night class. We go to a past life 1 week where it needs healing resolution to clear out any blocks or resistance to what we're working on. And then the following week, we go to a positive life where you can remember what it feels like to, for instance, fully embrace and trust the intuitive messages and guidance from your higher self. In that memory, you can then, what does it feel like to have that? What does it feel like what does it feel like to be confident, or what does it feel like to be in your own flow and empowered, or what does it feel like to have strength and confidence to share how you're feeling and speak your truth, or what does it feel like to be on the opposite side of self-sabotage, and what does it or what does it feel like to not procrastinate, to be on the ball and be able to get things completed easily and effectively. Whatever, what you're looking at to release, what does it feel like to believe in yourself? What does it feel like to trust yourself, love yourself? It's endless possibilities of, clearing out what's in the way and clearing out those old belief systems and the parts of you that are stuck in the past, and letting them, regroup and come into a new connection and advisory role with you, but also the memory of that positive way, living, breathing, and feeling a certain way can also help you in your present incarnation move forward, knowing that you've done it before, which means you can do it again. And that your cell memory, your physical, mental, emotional, and energetic being now remember what it's like to be in that vibration, that frequency, that knowingness, that fact space, because it's not a theory anymore. It becomes a little more factual in that sense that it feels real. You've been there, you've felt it, you've experienced it, and it can be very powerful. So if you're doing your own work, giving yourself the opportunity to follow the positive side of something and reconnect into that cell memory, that alternate past life where you felt this way about yourself and what that meant to you. And at the end of the journey, giving yourself permission to bring that wisdom, that insight, that information, that knowingness, that knowledge back with you, so that it becomes a part of you and you become a part of it more easily, more clearly, and more in flow and synchronicity. So that's what it can feel like to go into past lives when you get there, how they can reveal themselves. It can be one sense only. It can be several of your senses coming in. It can be one or two, and every time it could change. Don't give yourself the opportunity to know that every time you go into a past life, that information and the way it reveals itself to you may change. And that might happen every single time, because where you're at today is not where you were at tomorrow. Where you're at today will not be where you are, you were yesterday. So we change, we evolve. And every time we do this, every time we go on a journey, we shift, and our perception and our ability to connect into those alternate and past lives shifts with us. And in that shift, every time we do this, our senses, our ability to open our senses, to connect with our senses, to allow our senses to flourish and thrive will shift as well. And don't be surprised if you begin to experience that, or you have been experiencing that. Just let yourself go with it. Let yourself be with it. Let it show you why, maybe one life you were a seer and the other life you were a feeler or a knower, or you smelt the entire life. You'd be surprised. I have clients that go in and all they can do is smell the scene, but the scene, as they use their sense of smell and their sense of taste, actually unfolds just as much information and insight and wisdom as if they were seeing it. It's just a different way of seeing. And as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about it. The time when I was blind, at 8.5 years that I was blind, and working towards, trying to improve my well-being. When I went into past lives, I remember seeing, and in my dreams I would see. And that was an interesting contradiction, because I would actually open my eyes expecting to be able to see. It's a bit shocking at times when I was like, oh, no, we're still blind. But there were times, when even though in my physical reality, I didn't have my 90% of my core sight, but in my hypnotic trance reality, I had sight. And in my dream world, I dreamt sighted. Well, and the premonition dream that I had about losing my sight ended the day I went blind, which was very interesting. How those premonition dreams for me kept happening until the moment they were actually a part of my reality. But it was I dreamt of driving a year before my sight returned. So when we go into these sessions, sometimes our inner sights, even though our inner abilities and our inner senses do shift to a heightened space of awareness and capability and clarity, and just allowing yourself to experience what that means for you each and every time will unfold the journey as it was meant to unfold. And I've also seen this in the chair where people have gone back to lives more than once. It's common. It happens because the first time you go into that life, you see it from a certain perception and emotional connection. The second time you go back, that perception has shifted because of the work you did the first time. And sometimes some lives have a lot of layers to their onion, and to get to the core of it so it can be completed takes a little bit of time. And it's funny and interesting because sometimes when you go back to a site, you can go back and your sense will be different. How you sense that life again may be unsighted. Maybe it's through your sense of knowing and your feeling, and that's a thing. So that can happen, and it can happen a lot. And again, once again, just giving yourself the moment to see how that unfolds for you will help you move through your adventure a little more easily and clearly, if that's something that you are interested in doing. So that's how to feel, and sometimes how to perceive your past lives, and how it may or may not work for you, and how it's going to work for you is going to be very, very individual. So I want to thank everybody for joining me here for Morning Coffee and Conversation about past lives. We will be live again Wednesday next week and Friday morning. So if this is some content that you like, please smash that like button, that follow button, that subscribe button. I super appreciate your time and energy. And if you have questions, please join us on the live to ask them, or send me a message, or email me your question at snowjenl@gmail.com. And I would love to answer them. And if you're like, I want to know more about this, but I want to have a conversation, I do offer free discovery calls over Zoom. And you can go to blendedconnections.com, and that discovery call link, sign up there is there. Once you set up, the link will come to you, and on that day we'll have a conversation where I can answer all your questions. And you hopefully, if that resonates with you, you're like, yeah, I want to do this, then we can proceed forward. And if you're like, what, I just wanted to know, that's okay too. Because when I began this process, I had a lot of questions and I didn't have all the answers. I was going through school, experiencing hypnosis and past lives and all this alternate lives and alternate universes and dimensions. And yeah, it was a lot. And so sometimes we ask questions and we're like, oh, now I have like 10 other questions to that question. So, and I'm happy to answer them. I hope that you guys have a happy Black Friday, happy Thanksgiving for those of you in the States, and everybody else have an amazing weekend. Thank you for your time, your energy, your support. It means the world, and we will be talking soon. Cheers.